Hi, I'm Debbie Avoux. In today's tutorial, we'll be painting these palm trees.
Wasting this time that I borrow, running too fast for the sun, and my eyes they still burn for tomorrow. Ooh.
For supplies, you're going to need a 1-inch flat wash brush, a 5/8 angular brush, a number 8 filbert, a number 2 round, and then for your paint you'll need Quinacridone Magenta, Cadmium Yellow, medium hue, primary blue or brilliant blue, white, and black. I always like to use a couple of water cups, one for dirty water, one for clean. You'll need a palette. I prefer using these paper palette pads, but you can also use just a paper plate or a piece of glass or a picture frame. It really doesn't matter. Grab a stack of paper towels and you'll need a canvas. I'm using a 16 by 20 canvas today. So we're going to start off on your palette. You want to have some white, your blue, your yellow, and your magenta. We'll add the black later. And then we're going to start off just mixing a big scoop of the white and a little bit of the blue. We're going to make our blue sky color, and just make sure you have a clear sense of the mix that you're using, because we'll probably be mixing a lot more of this because you'll probably run out. So just cover your entire canvas with the blue, and adding a little bit of water will help you spread it across the whole canvas easier. And then if you want to add little bits of white here and there so it's not just a plain boring shade of blue, I like to mix in a few different shades just so it adds a little more interest. And then I always like to darken up the edges of the canvas a little bit. Just add a little bit of blue. You don't have to do this, it's up to you. I just think it adds a little more interest and puts more of the focus on the center of the painting. And then I'm just taking my angular brush, that second largest brush, and I'm just laying out where that main palm tree is going to go. And just make sure when you do this, it doesn't matter what color you use because we're going to cover up this color later anyways. You just make sure it's wider at that bottom right corner and then get skinnier towards the top, because we want that perspective to really look like it's fading back into the distance. And then for the clouds, I'm using my large brush, and you just want a tiny bit of paint on your brush, not much at all. And you're just gonna smash your brush down on the canvas and sort of wiggle it around to create a fluffy cloud effect. And most of these clouds are gonna get covered up with your palm trees, so you're not really gonna notice these that much, so don't stress out too much about the clouds. Really just creating a little bit of a smudge, the effect of some clouds in the sky will just add a little bit more interest to your sky. And these don't have to be perfect puffy clouds. You can just add some smears of white across just to give the effect of some wispy clouds in the background. And just make sure that they don't all have the exact same shape. That's one thing that gets really tricky when you're painting clouds. You want to make sure you have a variety of shapes and sizes. And then keep them really faint to start with, and then go back in and you'll add just a little more white paint on your brush and tap the edges of them, creating little highlights, and decide if you want to do the right side or the left side. In this painting we're going to have the light source coming from the right, so just add little bits of white on all the bumps of the clouds, the right edges of the clouds. Add just a touch of white to give a little more shape to them. So next we're going to mix a brown shade to create our tree trunks, and to make brown you're going to use all three of the colors. So just take a little bit of each of those three colors, not the white, and mix it until you get a nice brown shade. And you're just going to lay in the basic shape of your first tree trunk. Again, making sure you're wider at the bottom. I'm using the angular brush for this one. And if you hold the pointy part of the brush upwards, so the top of the tree is going to be that point of the brush, it'll give you a little more control. And just make a nice smooth edge on both sides, wider at the bottom and skinnier towards the top. Then you're going to go ahead and lay in your other palm trees. I added 2 on the left and 1 on the right. Now we're going to mix a slightly lighter shade of brown, so add a little more yellow to that brown mixture and a little bit of magenta. And we're just going to create kind of a lighter, warmer brown, so it's a different tone. And we're going to start building up the different shades on your tree trunks. So we're going to start on that far left hand edge using that angular brush again, and you want to create sort of a curve so it feels like it's wrapping around the shape of the palm tree. If you do it straight across, it won't give it that perspective and dimension, so make sure you're curving that line just a little bit. So we're just going along the whole left side and curve it around about halfway. And you're going to do that, adding little bits of that color on all the left hand edges on all of your trunks. And if you need to switch to the smaller filbert brush, the second smallest brush, that might give you a little more control on those tinier trunks. Now we're going to use that filbert again, the second smallest brush, and we're going to make a highlight shade. So I'm adding a little bit of white to that last brown mixture, and you want to start on the right edge of the trunks on this part, and we're just adding little smudges, little bits here and there. We're going to be doing a bunch of different highlight shades, so this is just the first layer, and you want to make sure you start on that far right edge and then just go about halfway over towards the left side. Using this angular brush is very helpful to get that nice sharp edge and keep it all in line there. And just make sure when you're using this brush that the pointy part of the brush is facing upwards towards the top. And you don't want to be too consistent. You want it to be spread out so it's not the entire trunk. You just want little bits here and there. It'll make it feel more realistic if you have just little bits spread throughout. Now we're going to add a lighter layer of highlight, so we're adding a little bit more white and a little bit of yellow, so we have a slightly different shade. And we're doing the same technique, just adding little smudges here and there with that lighter shade. And you can do some skinny lines, some thicker lines to give that trunk a lot of depth and dimension and texture. And again, switching back and forth between the smaller brush and the angular brush will give it a little more variety and variation. Now we're going to go a bit lighter, adding a little more white, maybe a little more yellow to have a next layer of highlights. Same technique, do this on all of the trunks. Now we're going to start on the palm leaves. We're going to mix a dark green. So you're going to take a big scoop of yellow, some blue, a tiny bit of magenta, and we're going to use our little tiny brush for this part. And adding a little bit of water to it will help the paint flow a little more. And we're just going to lay out the main branches, so the spines of each of the palm leaves. And you want to make sure these are flaring out and curving in all different directions. So you're going to just add a little guide to start with. And you can always add more later, but we're just going to start with about maybe like 6 or 7, 8 of these main branches. Now we're going to add a little black to our palette and make this a really dark green. So these first layers, you want to make sure we're starting with our darkest color, and then we're going to build lighter and lighter shades of green as we go. But for this color, you want it to be a very dark green. So we're just adding some black to it. And if you need to mix more paint, you want to do that now. We're going to use our 5/8 angular brush for this. And make sure you're using the very pointy part of that brush. And we're going to create the little palm frond leaves. So it's almost like you're just painting with just the tip of that brush, that pointy tip. And we're just going to add a bunch of little leaves, and make sure, this is very important, the very end of each one of those palm leaves, make sure it comes to a point at that final ending spot. And you're just going to add these little tiny leaves onto each of those spines, the main branches. And you want to add leaves on both sides. And you don't have to do that on every one of them. Sometimes you might just want to have half of the leaf showing, so you don't have to add it to the right and left side of each spine. If you're struggling with this part at all, sometimes it helps to practice on your palette. So if you take that brush, you push down with that brush and then lightly flick it up. As you're flicking it up, you can get a nice pointy tip on it. So just push down and then flick your wrist up. That little pointy part of your brush is the last thing you want to be touching the canvas, and that's going to help you get that nice sharp edge to it. more palm tree on that far right side, just so it looked like there's another tree over there. There's no trunk, but you just want to add a few leaves so it doesn't feel like they just cut off. And then we're going to mix a lighter shade of green. So take a big scoop of yellow and mix a little bit of that into some of your green. For this next layer, we're going to build up a lot of layers of lighter green, lighter green, lighter green. and eventually get to like a really light white highlight. So start off with not getting too bright, and we're just going to do the same technique that we did that first round, but we're just going to add a lighter shade right on top of where all of your dark green layers were. And you don't have to do this on every single palm leaf. Sometimes it's a good idea to leave a few of them out so they stay darker and they look like they're in shadow more. So just do this throughout all of the palm trees. Now for the next layer of green, we're going to get a little bit lighter, a little bit brighter. We're going to add a little bit of a different shade of green. So add a little more yellow, a little white, and a tiny bit of magenta. So this is going to create kind of a warm olive green shade, but a little bit lighter than that last green. And then with each layer, you're going to do less and less highlights. So for this next shade, you're just going to pick some random spots, maybe like where you think the sun would be hitting the palm tree, and you're just going to add little bits here and there. And don't go too crazy. Sometimes it can get overwhelming if you do it all over the entire tree, then you lose a lot of the depth. So just pick a few areas where you want to add this. You can even take this color and just add a little bit on that spine of a few of the branches. Just don't do it everywhere. Just pick a few choice spots. Now we're going to go a little bit brighter, a little more white, a little more yellow. And again, you're going to do even less of this layer. So this is a pretty bright highlight. Just be real subtle with where you put it. And then it's always a good idea to keep it darker towards the center of the palm tree, like right in the middle, and that'll give it a lot more depth. If you do find that you added a little too much, you can always go back in with some of your darker green. Like right here, I felt like I added a little too much, so I just went back in with a little bit of my darker green and covered up some of those highlights. That's the great thing about acrylic paint. You can cover up your mistakes, you can change it back and forth. You have a lot of freedom with it. So now we're going to add a shadow color. So you're going to take a scoop of blue and a scoop of magenta. We're going to create a deep, rich purple violet shade. And we're going to add some shadows into the depths of the palm tree and onto the trunks. So water your brush down just a little bit because we don't want this paint real thick and heavy. We want it to be very transparent and translucent. And you're just going to add tiny little bits right in all the areas where your dark green is. You're basically just going to go right on top of those dark green areas. And this is just going to add an extra layer of depth and give that palm tree more dimension. And I'm just using the very, very tip of that angular brush, that little pointy part, keeping it very subtle. And we're going to do that same thing on the trunk. You want to keep this on the left edge of the trunk. And I'm just doing little bits. It's hard to tell on the video. Can't see it. I don't know if you can see it very well on the video, but in person it just adds a lot more color and life to it. You never want to go back in with like a black shadow color. You always want to have something a little more vibrant, and I always do this on all my paintings. It's one of my final steps, is going in with a little bit of this purple color, and it'll just make it a lot more interesting. Again, I barely have any paint on my brush, so it's a very thinned out, watered down layer of this color, and I'm just adding little bits. You can always add more. If you do too much, then it's harder to go back. You don't want to cover up all the highlights you did. You just want to add subtle, subtle little bits of a thinned down violet color. And now I want to add one more layer of a brighter highlight on my trunks. So I'm mixing up a little bit of white, yellow, and a tiny bit of magenta. And this is going to be the brightest highlight yet. And I'm just adding little touches here and there on each of the trunks. Now I'm going to add a little bit of a reflected light onto each of the tree trunks. So I'm mixing that background color that we made, the blue and the white, and making it a little bit darker than that light blue of the sky. And I'm wiping off almost all the paint. So I barely have any paint on my brush. And on that left edge, in all those dark shadows, I'm just doing a subtle little swipe of a tad of that blue color. And this is just, again, going to add another layer of color and give a little more interest into all the shadow areas of the tree trunks. Now you want to stand back and look at your painting and decide if you want more highlights anywhere, if you want more shadows, and so I'm just going back in and adding a few extra highlights here and there where I feel like it needs an extra pump of color. And like I said, the great thing about acrylics is you can fix mistakes really easily. It's my favorite thing about acrylics because I change my mind sometimes, and that's okay. I decided I felt like there was too many highlights and there wasn't enough dark areas in the tree. So I'm mixing that dark green, that first color that we started with, and I'm just covering up a bunch of the areas I feel like I went a little overboard. So if you like how yours looks, then don't touch it. Like, this isn't something you have to do. I just decided it was bothering me. There was too many highlights. So I'm going to go back in, darken them up, and then I'll bring the highlights back out afterwards. And now just sign your painting. We are done. On all of my paintings I have a little signature thing that I do. I add 2 little ladybugs that represent my 2 kids. So I always add those on the side of each of my paintings. They're always in a different spot. And this is just a way to have my kids with me on all my artwork. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe so you can get notified when I upload new videos. Oh, that was nasty. All right, did you have fun? You worked hard. Yeah. He's lazy. Yes. All right, you tired? Hard work, huh? Have a great day. Bye.